Welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of Pockets of Joy, your weekly podcast dedicated to bringing you happiness and inspiration. I'm your host, Niamh O'Connell from the Wellness Clinic. Today my guest is musician, composer and storyteller Anne Harper in County Down, Ireland. Let's dive into this pocket of joy and learn about Anne's mission to preserve an ancient heritage site in her area, some Irish folklore, how Anne approaches being a creative entrepreneur, motherhood, and the power that's created when women share their stories. Check my YouTube channel for the video version. Thank you for coming on, Anne, and thanks to all my listeners. This is our next episode where we have Anne Harper, an amazing trailblazer and a woman I've looked up to for at least 15 years. I've met her once in real life, but I have just admired all her projects. And every time I see her online, she's promoting something new that she's doing. She is a musician, she's a composer, she's a storyteller, you are a mom of 3, you're renovating an old property, you rescue battery hens, or at least I want to hear about that. You have a rescue pup, you do ghost tours, you've got a podcast. Like, is there anything you don't do, Anne? You're just absolutely...
I play well, yeah, and that's actually, none of those things are the things that I trained to do, which was I've been doing for the last 25 years predominantly, which is play the clarinet and teach. You know, I'm a music educator, so that's my background is actually all of these things have kind of grown out of the other stuff, bizarrely. So.
Distinguished musician and composer. I was listening to some of your music this morning and it led me down a path just following what you've been doing in your career, like professionally, and you are par excellence a musician and educator. So I'm delighted to have you on the pod for Pockets of Joy, Episode 2. Thanks for joining me.
I'm delighted to be here. I'm staggered to be here. I'm very grateful that you asked. That was an amazing introduction. and you know, I just listen to hear you saying all those things and I think, oh my God, why did no one ever notice that I had ADHD before?
Like, you couldn't do all that without ADHD. You need that broad perspective.
No. Yeah, totally. I think that there's a word for it and I'm not sure what it is. There's a word for people who kind of do lots of stuff, and I like to think that I do it well, because I certainly try to do it all well. And for me, they all do connect. They all do have connections. Principally, they're around communication and the environment. And, you know, obviously music is my main language. And in the recent years, then storytelling is added to that. But that's not weird in Ireland, really. It's weird now, maybe, but it didn't used to be weird. Music and stories always went together. So I feel very comfortable in that particular place. But I would say it's taken me a long time to find it.
Yeah. And I didn't even mention, I forgot in my intro, one of the things I'm most in awe of you doing is the whole campaign to Save Knock Iveagh. Did I say it right?
You did. Well, there's different ways. People say Iveagh or Iveagh. I would say it the second way, but my friend who's lived here all her life would call it the other way, Iveagh, or Iveagh. So no, I mean, it's from the Irish of Acach, and it's a hill here in County Down, just outside the town of Island, close to where I live, where well, there's a Neolithic burial cairn. It's named after the sun god, and the kings and chieftains were inaugurated on it. And unfortunately, because we live in a country here where rules don't very often, they can kind of get omitted. And there was a massive problem with the planning process, and the heritage people also let us down badly. And so it's been left to people from the community to try and defend it against unlawful and inappropriate development. So yeah, it's been fun. When it comes to this word development and progress and all of these fancy words we give for destruction, you know, it's very often dressed up as one thing, but these are places that are unique to the cultural identity of Ireland, where you don't find these places anywhere else, and they're also part of our sort of cultural memory, if you like. They're places that in the old tradition would have, you know, folklore, history, memory. Practices, particularly in the case of Knock Iveagh, going back pre 3600 BC and right up until at least the 17th century, that continuity of practice and this veneration of this place was a real thing. And obviously people forget things. There was a lot of displacement of people here as well, in the 17th century. And then over time, the memory faded, but didn't fade for everybody. And I was lucky because I have family that have lived up there for hundreds of years. And my father was an archaeologist. So when I was a child, he would bring me up there and just sort of explain to me a little bit about why it was a special place. He never said, you know, this is where the kings were inaugurated. And he never said too much, because at that time we hadn't really looked into it, but we have now. And we got some wonderful help from an archaeologist who was the former keeper of antiquities at the National Museum in Dublin, a chap called Eamon P. Kelly, wonderful man. And he got on the bus from Connemara in his retirement to come up here and do a piece of research. Didn't get paid, because he recognised that it was an incredibly important royal ritual landscape that we have. And so all those hunches that we'd had that, you know, this was a really important place and we had to do whatever we could to save it, we didn't know how special it was. We just knew it was special. But now we know it's really unique, this whole landscape. So, and that was the reason why I started to tell these stories about the area, because we lost the stories. So I just want to put them back a wee bit.
Oh, gosh, I'm getting shivers thinking about it. I did a little deep dive into you and your family, and I saw that your dad got an OBE in the 90s for his work on conservation.
Yes, so yeah, Daddy was an archaeologist, and then he followed his sort of heart path, which was to go into the church. His daddy, my father's father, my grandfather, had told him to get a real degree first and grow up a bit, and then see if he still wanted to go into the church. But he did. So in his 30s, he announced to my mother that he was going down to Trinity to train. And I think I would have told him to sling his hook if he was my husband, pregnant with twins at the time, and numbers 3 and 4. But anyway, he did it, and he ended up as the Archbishop. So he followed his path, and it was the right path. And now he's retired. But he carried with him, I think, his understanding of geography, archaeology, anthropology, and those things through into his church life. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that the books of the Bible are historical documents, and we have to interpret things as well.
Absolutely.
He's a very clever man.
And who better than our bards and our storytellers and our musicians to keep this history and to keep showcasing the importance of our landscape and our heritage. So I think,
well, I don't know, I think the archaeologists would argue that, you know, the science must come first.
I think they have to go together, definitely, because you're going to the heart with music, and then we do want the science backup. We want to read the papers and see the x-rays or whatever hopefully can be done. And at the moment, I know there's a wind farm on top of the...
So yeah, they've erected a wind turbine. It got planning permission, but only because they didn't consult the archaeologists, and they were supposed to. So there was a massive problem. And then whenever we went back to the archaeologists and said, look, you guys weren't consulted, they said, oh my goodness, no, we weren't. And then when they looked at their records, they realized that they'd actually misinterpreted the place, and they'd given permission for something else in the past. And so they lost their legal standing. They couldn't challenge it.
And is there a way to have that removed now, or are you stuck with it?
Well, the time has run out whereby it could be, the planning permission could be revoked, but it could still be discontinued, which is a different process. And we have got a lawyer barrister who are looking into that process for us. Thankfully, it's taken us a long time to be in a position to have that legal support. Had we had it at the start, it would have been a very different story. We are still up against it. But there's a sort of another side to this, as well as sort of removing this inappropriate thing that's detracting from this amazing view of the hill. And if I could just try and describe what's going on this hill, the ancients, and I think you'll find this interesting, Neve, from another perspective, the ancients perceived their relationship with their land as one of themselves with a goddess, and the goddess was the one who gave them their crops, who favored them or didn't favor them. And it was an interaction. The sun was the sort of masculine side, and the land was the feminine side, and the two coming together was what gave them what kept them alive. And I think these days we don't look at the world like that, but for me, it's still true, and it hasn't changed. That is still the case. Whether you call it a god or a goddess, that's irrelevant. We are still dependent on those two supernatural forces of nature to if that's not that's a bit hypocritical, but you know what I mean. Those things are beyond us, and they will outlast us as well. So I still see this as sort of a supernatural thing. The sun is amazing, the land is amazing, and the idea that the land was embodied in certain hills. So at Knock Iveagh, to me and to others, she looks like a woman lying on her side. And they put this cairn where her breast would be, and they sort of, this was a sort of an idea that this was where we would go and mate or marry the land goddess. And that's in fact what the kings did. They went there and they had this ceremony called a ban rí, where they were ritually married to the land, to the goddess, the Cailleach Bear. And then that was also played out in the actions of the sun and the landscape as well. So they saw the world in a really magical way. And I see it that way as well.
Yeah. Have you always had that connection? Do you remember going back to childhood? Did you have any kind of powerful moments with nature? Because I had one at 14 and I didn't even know where I was or what I was doing, but I was brought by my family to the Hill of Tara. And I had no clue about the history. I think I just heard about High Kings. I didn't even know what that was. I never really listened much in history in school. Didn't have inspiring teachers. And I remember standing on top of not the Hill of Tara, but one of the other ones. And I remember just being alone in this landscape and the wind in my face. And I remember just feeling something powerful shoot through my whole body. And it was a real moment of awakening that I've always thought back to as being like, the moment I realized nature had a force outside of me, but also within me. And I was a very spiritual child. I wanted to be a nun for a while, thanks to the Catholic upbringing and the heavy pushing of the nuns in schools. I thought that the life of a nun was for me because I was very devout and I loved the idea of the solitude and devoting my life to God. I really wanted to do that as a young child. But then I lost, all my religion, and I'm quite atheist now. From about 15, 16, I started to get skeptical and go, well, come on, where's the proof? But I don't think that moment was anything to do with God. I didn't think of anything consciously. It was just literally, it took me over. And
yeah, I definitely, not now as a child, I was, because my father had been an archaeologist, we were taken out to circles and into historical stuff the whole way through my growing up. And they say abuse is cyclical, and I do the same thing to my kids now. So I definitely had lots of experiences in places, and they became very much part of my psyche. And in fact, at one stage, I spent my work experience, I did 2 days in the Ulster Orchestra and 3 days in the archaeology department at Queen's. So I was at 15, really, I love both those things. But I remember the most, obviously Knock Iveagh was a place that I visited a lot, and it was always really special. I had bought boyfriends there, bought my husband there, bought my kids there. And then I do remember a day before it all kicked off where I took the kids and John up, and it was very windy. It can be a bit windy up there, which is why they've put a turbine on it. And I was standing on the edge of the cairn, and I could see, and the view up there is stunning, and it was meant to be stunning because you're the king. This is your land, right? So you're able to see it all, and you're the man, and you stand up there and you get that sense of awe and wow and some kind of connection between the earth and sky. At least that's how it feels. And I put my arms up and did this, and I said to John, and this is not, I felt really awkward about it, but I did it anyway. I said, would you take a photograph of me? I want to feel like I want to capture this moment. The sun's overhead, the moorns are spread out in front of me. I'm standing on this Neolithic burial cairn, and I feel like, wow. And I've got that picture, and that picture, actually, if you're a king and you're being inaugurated, that's what you want to feel, that responsibility. But also, you're seeing that land laid out in front of you, and it's not orange and green.
yeah,
Right? In Northern Ireland, we're very good at orange and green. It's people, it's little farms, it's nature, and it's all one, under the sun. And so for me, that was a really powerful moment. And I think I got a little bit of an insight into what the place was that wasn't written down anywhere. And I remember before they put the turbine up, and this is awful, but I'll tell you, for a long time, I was concerned about a track way up to the top of the hill that had arrived, and very convenient. You could just walk up this track and it was no bother. But I didn't like it. Something about it felt wrong. And I kept on having this road. Need to do something. Need to ring up and just see, have they consulted about this? Because it's a very delicate landscape. And the road. So eventually, I think it was the 1st of September 2017, I actually contacted the Historic Environment Division to ask about this track. And then it wasn't the first. Trying to get it's been so long. It was the first. And then on the 5th of September, a few days later, we had to ring them in a panic because they had diggers up there, and they were pouring concrete in, and they were putting up an unlawful broadband mast. So it was as though those voices inside my head that were going, do something, they got to such a point that I did something. And then they did their thing. They started to dig through the top of the hill. And then we were on the phone to HED again going, look, there's diggers up there, what's going on? And they were going, but didn't you rang us the other day, or you emailed us on Monday, so how did you know? And I didn't know, except that I was feeling this, you must do something. And I wish I had done it sooner, because I was feeling that for years, but I didn't act. So it was annoying. But yeah, when they started to do this unlawful development and tried to put up this broadband mast, which we did get removed, it was very, very close to this huge Neolithic cairn, which was probably a passage tomb originally. It's a very big one, a passage tomb, not like Newgrange, not that sort of size, but more like the Cailleach Beara's tomb at the top of Slieve Gullion. And underneath that cairn, there is a layer of bone and ash, and it's about 4 inches thick. And it's a sign that they probably had, well, some people would say they had fires up there. I think it's very likely they did light fires up there, but it takes a long time to build up a layer of ash and bone that's 4 inches thick. So that was before they built this cairn in the Neolithic. They were honouring it in some other way. It was a ritual place in some other way. And so they took this digger up. There was this digger up there, and they were just sort of digging and pouring their concrete. And we don't know where the limits of that very delicate layer of archaeology lie. And I watched this thing happening. I drove the kids home from school and looked up and thought, oh God, and said to my kids, oh, I'm going to have to go up and do something. And then I was like, but I'm scared too. What if, what if it gets nasty? And they said, but Mummy, you always said that if we believed in something, we should do it. So I had to go. And it wasn't too bad on the first day.
To the workmen, what happened?
I went up, I switched my phone on, I put my camera on, and I said, you do realise that you're digging in a protected area, that there's burial here, this is an ancient site, and I don't know what kind of permissions you've got, because I'd be very surprised if you got any at all. And of course the digger man just said, oh, I'm just doing my job and I don't know anything about it. And they had no permission at all. They were just sticking it up. And that happens all the time. And had we not, because obviously it wasn't just me, there was other people who cared once the story got out. But had we not challenged it at all, that mast would still be there, and this hill probably would have more masts on it. But we couldn't challenge the turbine because we didn't have a lawyer at the time, and the turbine had permission, even though the permission was deeply, deeply dodgy. They still had the
separate place to the mast, is it? Or
it's a little bit further away. So the mast was sort of right adjacent to the cairn and well within the area that really should be better protected. And of course it's the same in the south. Archaeology isn't very well protected, and what they don't really understand is that form of the goddess, if you like, that outline of the hill, that view is really important, and it's not protected in law. It's that view that's inspiring. It's that view that the poets here in Ballerony had of the hill, and it is inspiring, and that it's from further away and looking up at the hill that you see the interaction of the sun with the landscape, and you understand what people who lived here before understood. And it's only through that. So if you stick a turbine on it, which they have done, and it dominates the whole hill, where is your eye going? It's going straight to that structure. It's not going to the cairn. It's going to this moving thing. Now, I'm not opposed to wind turbines, although I have to tell you that I really wasn't at all opposed to wind turbines. I was a big fan, and I am an environmentalist, but I saw the ugly side of the industry. I saw the greed. I saw that they didn't care about the environment because they wanted their money. And they're making a lot of money in rocks. And we have this incentive scheme here in the north. You probably heard about RHI scandal, where people literally got paid to heat empty chicken sheds with pellets because of an incentive scheme to burn, to change over the type of fuel that you were using. And it was well dodgy, and there was a whole big inquiry about it. And this is a similar kind of thing. They're getting paid money just to have a turbine up there, and it didn't
really it's greenwashing, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. So I am an environmentalist, and I do see the need, but I also see that this is part of our denscensus, our sense of place. These places should be protected from changes, not just within 10 meters of the cairn, but changes that are going to drastically affect how we see the landscape. Because then we lose our sense of place.
I was recently in Rusborough House in Blessington, which is a lovely Georgian Palladian style manor house built in the 1780s or something. And that has a protected view from all the windows at the front of the house. So you're not allowed to build at all within the eye line. And they've deliberately made a lake and trees. And it was for the landowners back then, who were the English who came here, for anyone who's listening abroad who doesn't know Irish history. So they got their protected landscape, and that still stands today. And I mean,
That's great.
that's great for them. We've got things that are even older, even more worthy of protection, and we're not protecting that. That really enrages me.
Well, it enrages me as well. And I think this is where we touch on sort of neurodiversity, because we don't really look at how change affects people differently. Yeah. So some people might not care that they lose their view of the sunset, but for someone else, the loss of that very deeply embedded piece of our DNA that we're programmed to know our place in the universe by the rising and falling of the sun, that might actually affect that person who's maybe neurodiverse or maybe has autism or something like that in a really deep way. And this isn't part of the consideration either.
Yeah.
And I think it should be.
And it's all down to money at the end of the day. In one of my local areas, there was some archaeology done on a piece of wasteland, and it was done in the 90s. There's some great records available, and then they were finding burial things, and it was the site also of Norman towers and a fairy fort, which goes back to God knows when. And they ran out of money for the archaeology, and it's since got built over. We've got 3-story townhouses there now. So you just think, what else is under there that could have been kept and preserved? And even the fairy fort was flattened in favor of a church back in the 1940s, and they knew that that was a site of pagan worship and prehistoric. I don't know the correct.
And that's exactly why it was built on. That's exactly why it was appropriated by Christianity, and that is kind of okay, if you know what I mean. There's a continuity of practice in the landscape. I'm not saying it's all fine, but you know, that churches went on pagan sites because they were sacred spiritual places, and they were overwriting what existed before. I wouldn't love that. That's not where my heart is, but I understand it's a continuity of practice. But what they've done there is they've removed your connection with the possibility of going to that fairy fort. And does that matter? That's the question.
And in all the old of the area, this is Crumlin, so it's a very ancient monastic and historical site. It goes back to the Fianna, and the commons here were used for grazing animals right up to the 1950s until all the housing estates were made. But that has all gone now. The landscape has changed, because that fairy fort, which appears in the old etchings and the Norman towers are there, it's gone now, and it's flattened, and we just have a housing estate there instead.
So my question then is, and I think it's a really valid question, when you remove somewhere like that, and when you change somewhere like Knock Iveagh, how does that impact on the people's living experience, their lived experience living in the landscape? And as a musician and a storyteller, and someone who's, I would say, whose therapy is nature and these old places in the landscape, I genuinely, that's where I rebalance. The loss of that may be small to one person, but could be huge to someone else. And I'll give you a couple of examples from our cultural heritage here in Ireland. They say, and I'm sure it's true, that O'Carolan wrote his first piece of music after spending time in a fairy fort, falling asleep in a fairy fort, and got up and he wrote, I think it was Sheela, Shemore, but he got inspired, literally, they said, by the fairies. And people always said that people got inspiration from the fairies, whatever way you perceive the fairies to be. It could just be a magical place. And someone else here, you know, one of the great, the father of the Bronte sisters also spent a lot of time in a fairy fort nearby, again, for that solace, that sense of connection and the magical side of our world. And as we remove the magical, inspiring places, what do we do to the people?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And when do you think we became so unconcerned with our heritage and our place? Do you think it's only in the last few decades with technology, or do you think it was in the 1600s or in the 1840s? When can you trace it back, and can you see when we kind of had to let it go or just forgot about it, that whole sense of place?
I would say it's more recent than that. I would say that it wasn't the Industrial Revolution, although that certainly will have separated a lot of people from their places. But it's very clear to me, at least, that if you look at the way farmers, for example, have interacted with their land, some farmers won't touch a fort still. And there's a guy near me who hasn't touched his fort because his uncle told him not to. Under no circumstances are you to touch that fort. And I'm very glad that he knows that. But others have lost their fear of some consequences. So they would regard those stories of people coming to harm because they damaged an ancient place. They would regard that as just nonsense, old-fashioned nonsense. And that seems to have happened really, I would say, since about the 1960s. Okay. And so what happened around the same sort of time, and I would argue that it's the widespread use of media. So we're now looking at a screen, but we're not looking out the window. And so where our imaginations would have taken us one other place, they're now not activated at all, because we're being fed, we're consuming information, but we're not using our creative mind, our imaginations, because we've got too much information going in.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're all overstimulated. I certainly see it when I work with clients. No one can sleep. Everyone is stressed. And it's that we're going from one screen to another, from our waking moments on our phone, checking our feed, into work on a laptop. And then we're watching a movie to come down, or a Netflix box set to relax in the evening. And then we're on our phone again in bed. Like we might have 1 or 2 hours off screens per day, and that's it.
And maybe the only place that we go for exercise might be a gym rather than walking up a hill. And in nature. And for me, it is I have plenty of screens. I'm certainly addicted to screens, like most of us are these days, but I unplug regularly by going into nature, by going to ancient sites, by telling stories, reading stories, and I feel like that really is integral to my mental health. And play music, obviously, and that's one of the reasons that I took up the harp actually a few years ago, was although my degrees are in clarinet playing and I'm an orchestral player in my sort of professional life up to date, I've gone further and further into other genres and other types of music, other instruments even, because I needed something that wasn't so stressful, something that was more magical, something that was not on a concert stage, but for me, to nurture me. So I think as human beings, we are creative beings, all of us. Few of us have the confidence or the time or the inclination to really explore that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sad. Or maybe we don't have the inspiration as well. Maybe we lack.
I think what we're lacking is the inspiration, but also the time. Everyone says, I just don't have time to go up, for a whole afternoon. So I'll go to the gym instead and get my exercise in a 1 hour block. And what that does, I've only learned recently, for people with naturally high cortisol, like myself, being on the spectrum, I think a lot of us would identify with that feeling that we're quickly triggered, we're quickly upset, we're quickly made nervous or anxious by external stimuli. And for people like that with high cortisol naturally, whether it comes from neurodivergence or childhood trauma or a combination of whatever, actually working out at high impact and fasting and all these kind of extreme things we do to our bodies, they only serve to raise our cortisol even more, and that can make everything worse. Perimenopausal symptoms, hormone balance, stress and anxiety, our sleep will suffer. So what we need to look for, and I felt that naturally, I just knew I could never go to a gym. I hate the environment. I hate all the black chrome machinery. It's just not.
But also it's things like the noise and the smells, I just going out for a walk in nature and listening to bird song.
Yeah, sharing a machine with a sweaty person has just been all over the handles. That's my idea of
that's sensory stuff. But our senses are always on as humans, and as you know, even more so if you're neurodivergent, you're really aware of them. And that's one of the reasons why these experiences with nature, with places, I think are so important. They can literally reprogram us. They can reduce our blood pressure. They can give us inspiration and dull the mental noise that we live with.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's that if it was a medicine, if it was something that they could profit out of, they would protect it.
Yeah.
But as it is, they see it as expendable.
Yeah. And I always found I wasn't drawn to yoga or meditation. They were too slow for me because my mind wants activity and a bit of stimulation all the time. But I can definitely go for a walk for a couple of hours as long as my stamina lasts and my fitness. And I'm not kind of, power walking till I raise a
And
sweat.
is that even weird? You see, we've got this term, this neurodivergent name, and okay, I think there are factors that are increasing, neurodivergence, but I think that it's normal for humans to need the things that you're talking about and me. I don't think it's weird. What I think is weird is for somebody to feel that that's enough, that the Chrome is enough, and that the screens are enough. I feel like maybe it makes you much easier to sell stuff to or convince of things. Maybe we're more skeptical the more time we spend out away from screens. When people change the environment, it can have really different impacts on different people. And for me, it's very interesting as a woman to look at environmental change because I see it with someone who understands that in the past, this land was considered a mother, a goddess type person. And when we damage the land or when we change the land or when we dig deep into the land or penetrate the land or poison the land, air and the water, it's a type of violation to me. I would take it very seriously, making a big change to the land, because I see it as almost like an entity. And there's plenty of work going on around giving rights to nature. And that's very important because of the legal system that we have. But actually, I think it's kind of insulting in a way, because ultimately she will be fine. It's us that'll go. So I think the sooner we get our heads around this idea that we can violate her over and over with greedy people can do whatever they like. They're getting away with it all the time. But ultimately she will outlast them and us. So it's really up to us to decide what our future is going to look like. But I think that was particularly obvious to me as a woman.
Yeah.
And other women. And it was the women who responded most strongly to the violations of Knock Iveagh. The men were supportive, but they didn't really feel it the way that we did. So I do think that's an interesting observation. Many times it's women who respond.
I totally agree with you. And I would argue that the whole state that the world is in on a bigger scale is because women haven't been included in the discussions about progress and things being changed and developed and infrastructure.
Even the words developed, we use those, and it's not a criticism of you, that's the word we use. Yeah. Is it always development? Are we really developing?
No, we're not. Of course we're not. I feel that as well. And I've had huge emotional reactions, even just locally, to having had trees removed in the area. And we're in a city suburb, so every tree is important. And I'm a big tree fan. Like, I couldn't even start to describe how much I need trees around me in order to feel balanced. It's something about, and it's a neurodivergent thing I've discovered. I'm not alone, but.
And I'm going to say, Niamh, yes, you experience it and you are neurodivergent. And I would say I'm neurodivergent too. My daughter has been diagnosed autistic, and I'm sure that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Yeah. However, I would also argue that we're simply like the canary in the gold mine, that we notice stuff and it does matter. And other people, they just don't notice it quite maybe so much. But ultimately, they're getting diagnosed with depression. They're getting diagnosed with stress and anxiety. They're becoming ill because of changes in the environment. And really, we're just expressing a kind of humanity here. Our relationship with nature, which is and was always part of Indigenous populations' belief system. What has changed? The people that we live with are still the descendants of those native peoples who had that relationship with nature. So I would argue that we haven't changed. It's other things that have changed.
Definitely.
I don't think you're weird.
And also, I think it's the way that women work to change things. It's different to how men work to change things. And if we're at home, as you and I did, we breastfed our children, we're very focused on the immediate nuclear family for a certain number of time. Things can happen outside of our control. Trees can get cut down and not replanted, or suddenly a wind turbine is up on top of your cairn. And these things can slip through because we are necessarily taken up with the family and the caring, which is another female mostly trait. So I think if women ran the world, things would be very different.
And I also think that there's a lot of pressure on women to not nurture. They feel it because they'll experience, as I did, the sort of backlash of when you're out of the working world. Also, we need the money, so we're sort of forced away from, and and even this idea of leaving babies to cry, which is, I know, something that you didn't do, and it's certainly not something that I did, but I know perfectly lovely people who did it because they felt they had no choice, and it went against every fiber of their being in some cases to do it. When did we become the kind of species that normalizes this, and what does that do then to the next generation? And when that fundamental relationship is sort of, truncated.
Yeah.
And these are big questions.
We're the only species that tries to make our defenseless young infants sleep alone. And I just don't get it. It doesn't sit right with me, but I totally don't judge people who do it, because I know some mums are really light sleepers and they have to get up and do a 9 to 5. So they have to get their sleep, and the baby has to learn.
That's just so impossible.
And that,
and on our tribe,
I'm not blaming mums, I'm blaming society as a whole, that it has created this situation, and it's the children who are missing out and who are ultimately gonna suffer in the short term.
And the women also, and whether they, maybe it's not for everybody, but a lot of women do have very strong maternal urges, and they sort of, and you see the posts coming up, I have to go back to work and my child's going to have to go to nursery, and they're really in agony about it, and there needs to be a sort of slightly different approach, so that where necessary, women don't make stuff up, they don't say that child needs me when the child doesn't need me. They're not making that up.
And we don't breastfeed because we want to all the time, or because we somehow think it gives us a gold medal in mothering. It doesn't.
No, I'm still waiting for my gold medal.
Yeah.
Niamh.
Amir, this leads us on to your beautiful necklace. I've been wanting to ask you, and speaking of mothers, you're wearing a Sheela Iveagh, aren't you?
I am, yeah. I've only worn this for a couple of months. I'm working on a project that kind of felt like I wanted to wear my Sheela Iveagh little necklace. I have a range of necklaces that I get in all these museums. There's a great range that you can get hold of in the National Museum in Dublin. Not expensive, but they're sort of historically inspired, and this is one of the range. And I'm working on a project at the minute where we're trying to sort of give voice to the feminine stories, and in my case, the voice of maybe the Cailleach bearer of the land. And I see the Sheela Iveagh as kind of the way I interpret the Sheela Iveagh, and there's lots of ideas about what she represents, often found on the walls of churches as some sort of gargoyle almost, this horrible hag with a huge vaginal opening, and showing you her bits and how awful. But to me, she's almost like a sort of caricature of the goddess. So as if you could take her and turn her into something. This is not, you don't want to do this. This is your warning. A bit like the dragons on the side of a cathedral or something, or a gargoyle. This is the evil stuff. Stay away from her. She's bad news. Stay away from that goddess woman.
So you think she's representing the goddess of the land, is it?
I think that this is just my personal sort of thought process around it, the Cailleach bearer, this idea of the land goddess became, well, she for a while she was all right, and then as Christianity got more of a hold, she was still around, and I think that gradually over time she kind of got cartoonified a little bit, and almost turned into this Sheela figure, this fertile old hag, or this hag with this sort of horrible sexual appetite that would scare you, and I think that it was a way of sort of diminishing her power, was to gradually sort of accept her, integrate her, turn her into a saint, turn her into a gargoyle, and so she's still around, but she's sort of her focus has been changed from being this supernatural being to being something grotesque.
Oh, that's cool. I never thought of that at all. I never made the land connection. I thought it was a kind of a patriarchal depiction of maybe an older female that's not fertile anymore, so her vaginal opening is empty and nothing's going to be ever coming out of it again, because she's fertile years.
Well, going back to the hag, there's this old trope in the mythology of the hag with the money, that when you marry the land goddess at your inauguration, you're marrying this old woman, but she has the ability to become young and fertile again in the right arms, okay? And it's this trope that you find in other stories. You find it in The Wife of Bath by Chaucer, and in one of the Arthurian legends as well. And it runs deep. So there's this notion that if you had the courage to sleep or make love to this old woman and give her sovereignty, give her the power to choose, then she would reward you with riches, and she would become beautiful and fertile again. And so that's, I think, why she's sitting here with her big fanny open, She says, come on ahead and sleep with me if you're brave enough.
Oh, wow, I love that.
And then you get the reward. It's such a powerful and challenging image. And I remember the midwife, and I think maybe this maybe when we met, and we certainly met in Dublin. But there was a conference some years ago when Ina May Gaskin was here as well. I don't know if you were at that.
Yes,
And
that's
she,
the one I met you at, I think.
right. But Ina May Gaskin had a theory on the Sheela that she was a sort of inspirational figure, that she was showing you how big you could be for childbirth,
Love
and
that.
that this opening really had the potential to be huge
Yeah,
and allow life to pass out. So
yeah,
don't be frightened of it, kind of thing. I'm not sure I agree with her. I think for me, she is the hag with the money, Cailleach an Airgid,
yeah.
and she has the power to repay you with her fertile land if you're brave enough to love her. That's my interpretation. So.
I wore one of the Sheela na gig necklaces that was gifted to me on my mother blessing for my third baby, who was born in 2015. And I wore, that was the only thing I wore for the whole labor and birth, because I needed to be completely stark naked. And I was having a home birth. I must say that. I wasn't like in a hospital setting. So I was very comfortable being naked at home. But I wore that pendant, and I've actually lost it. I'd love to find it again. And it's in the videos of me holding my baby girl as she
Oh,
coming out
that's
of,
a shame.
yeah, it
And
is.
again,
Turn up.
she was there when you needed her.
Exactly. Yeah, she was. It was a very powerful symbol to wear.
Having maybe this woman, the Cailleach bearer, this idea of the hag, she's been around, she's been birthing and dying since the start. And there is comfort in our insecurity, in our insignificance, that
Yeah.
we are just another cog in the wheel, you and me. We're mothers, we're maidens, we're mothers, we're crones. And then the whole thing. And I watch my daughters growing up now, beautiful young women they're becoming. And it gives me great joy because we are just a part of this cycle, and we
No.
just have to trust the cycle.
And
That's
it's
the best.
yeah, I've had to accept that, which has been hard. Definitely it was the process of becoming an adult, realizing that I'm not going to be here forever. And I really think it only hit me when I became a mom. I think before that I was in a very blissful state. I'd been quite sheltered as a child. I never broke a bone. It was the first kind of big upheaval I had, was having children. And it certainly, I feel like I matured instantly, really becoming a mom. But it took a few years, but now I'm kind of okay with my mortality in a way that I never was before. And it still kills me, of course. I still don't want to really think about it, but I know that I will live on in the memories and stories, and hopefully I'll leave something behind as well.
That's the world we live in, is the world of ego, where you have to make a big splash, or you have to be the top, or you have to be the best. And one of the things that I discovered, having worked at a sort of top level in playing as a freelance clarinetist, it's pretty competitive, pretty hard work, and I've done it for 25 years,
Yeah.
sort of successfully, in inverted commas. It's really not the be all. Like, happiness is more important. Being normal is fine. um I'm not saying I never got famous or anything like that, but I was doing good work, and it wasn't necessarily bringing me joy. The things that bring me joy are those quiet moments that are full of deep joy and connection, not everything. All the ego stuff it's overrated, but it's very much what the world wants of us. It's what we're trained to do.
That is, yeah,
um
we're brought up and we're taught that we need to achieve. And I think women are being sold a lie as well, because a lot of women are looking around now at age 40 and thinking, oh, okay, I've done the career thing. I need to tick the next box. What am I doing now? Am I going to have a child? And I'm waning fertility. And they've spent all that time climbing the corporate ladder. And then they're having, this wake up realization, time is ticking. And we do have that ticking clock as women. And we're told to ignore it for a lot of the time as well,
Totally.
in favor
Like,
of
I didn't.
success.
Huh?
In favor of capitalistic success. Is that right?
I think so, but that's the man's world that we live in. And for me, I'm constantly reminded of all those people who weren't appreciated while they were alive. Lots and lots of people who you consider very famous now were nobodies until after they died. You just don't know what your legacy is going to be.
Who's on your list? Who are you thinking of there?
Oh, I'm thinking of Van Gogh. I mean, Mozart was famous while he was alive, but he didn't make an awful lot of money, and he certainly wasn't he was a child prodigy, so maybe not him, but many composers, whose names I can't think of right now, but were not well off, were not famous until long after they died, or appreciated, or thinkers who weren't appreciated during their life. So I don't think that the world we live in right now is necessarily the best judge of what matters. You might find that it I'm trying to think who else.
Well, there's so many women as well whose stories just aren't told. I'm even
Yeah.
thinking of my great grandmothers. They were really hard workers. They sacrificed huge amounts for their families. And would I even know their name? And that's only a couple of generations past. Will my
And
kids?
that's really true across
Yeah.
society. We don't hear the women's stories. And I'm working on a little sort of sideline, something that's interested me for a while, and it's in musical portraits of people. So many of the Harpers back in the day in Ireland would travel around all the big houses, and they would write music for their patrons, for the people who were paying them. And often they would write poetry as well, and flattering words and music. But the music that they wrote, it's all different depending on who they were writing for. Maybe a young woman, maybe a man, maybe an older woman. And I think that although we don't know the stories of these individuals, we can tell something about their character from the music that's left behind from this little musical portrait. And they are all different. So it's interesting. There's very little left of them except this tune. And the women's stories aren't told. So I'd really like to work a little bit more about telling their stories through their tunes at some point. It's on the to-do list.
That's gorgeous. Will that be broadcast somewhere, or is it going to be archived?
Oh God, I've no idea. I've no idea. Like, I have lots of ideas and I'm really good. I do see them through. But the whole marketing side of it, the whole kind of how to make money out of it, I'm still figuring that out. Not a businesswoman, Neve. I'm just a musician.
They say every artist needs a manager, and I'm married to an artist, and I'm quite artistic. I'm not the manager. I'm not the business or the tech head at all. And I'm really creative. And I know I've gone into quite a corporate work area with the wellness clinic, but my heart is in the creative everything, and I'm still not good at any kind of self-promotion when it comes to any of my work. So I don't know.
I think I've got it to some degree, the self-promotion thing, but I struggle with it because I don't like a hard sell.
Yeah, me
It
neither.
puts me off.
Yeah.
And I see people doing it and it puts me off.
Yeah.
I want to discover something for myself. I want people to enjoy what I've done on their own terms, not because I told them to.
Yeah, and find it organically and follow you because you speak to their heart, not because they're going to win a contest or get something out of it. I'm the exact same. Sure, I published 2 Kindle books last year, and I tried to do the hard sell for about a month around them, and I haven't mentioned them since on social media because I don't want to push them on people. So they're sitting there and nobody's buying them. I tell my clients,
and I totally get that.
Yeah, and I wrote the books out of wanting to share my knowledge, and I know they are useful, and I get great feedback, about them when people read them. But I'm not promoting them constantly as I should be. And part of it is, for me, learning social media I find tricky, and I feel like just when I get my grips on IGTV, suddenly it's gone and it's called a reel instead. And then I leave Instagram, as I did over the winter, for about 6 months. And suddenly I come back and the way you post videos or stories or the name of it has changed. And I have to learn it all anew. And it used to be like new technology every 5 or 10 years. Now it's like every 6 months things change and you have to keep relearning and retraining. And I just don't have the time, to be fair. I'm living my life,
Well, exactly. You're living your life. Yeah. But I do also think that the shouting about how great I am, I hope I don't do that. I kind of share what I'm up to because I think people are interested, but
you're when I see your stuff, you're spreading joy and you're like, hey, I'm doing this great project and I'm meeting these amazing people. And it's never just you on your own. You're always promoting the people you're working with and naming them and collaborating. It looks really just like you are loving all your projects. And
I am, especially at the moment, actually, because it's been a kind of challenging, difficult work time for me in the last few years. There was a period where I chose to step back from playing the clarinet in an orchestral setting, and because of the crap that goes on. And so I sort of fought my way back from that. But during this sort of time I was stepped back and focusing on the kids, I was exploring other art forms and sort of continuing my creative journey. And then when I came back to it, I'm trying to keep, you know, a foot in the old world. And then there's all this new stuff that is so much in line with who I am. And I'm working with people who are not in a sort of classical music box. They're doing their own things, and they're doing wonderful creative work. And it's been really interesting and challenging, and to try and figure out who I am in all of this. And I think I'm getting there, but it's difficult because I went to music college. I played, you know, in orchestras in Scotland. I come back and I freelanced here, and I did a bit of teaching. So that was, the clarinet was everything. And
very
and it's
structured world with its own parameters, and you know exactly what you're meant to show up and do every day.
Yeah, but you also have to tolerate, in my case, and I had to just, I don't want to say too much, but it presents challenges for somebody like me, who I would identify as, I'm not easy to push around, in the sense of, I'm a nice person, but I do have boundaries, and sometimes they weren't being respected by not all of, most of my colleagues are wonderful people, genuinely, but there's the odd time that's been really difficult. So I had to step back, and stepping back and then stepping back in again has been hard in lots of ways. And all the new ventures, playing the harp, telling stories, my history, the Knock campaign, all of these new kind of worlds that have opened up organically for me, they are really inspiring and important. So when I share this stuff, I love collaborating. Those people that I'm working with are genuinely inspiring me, and my colleagues genuinely, you know, in orchestra and so on, when I'm sitting there and we're playing music together, it's the best feeling ever. We're co-regulating the whole time, and it's fun.
Regulation, it's a whole stim, isn't it? Playing music, totally. Being around, listening to music, it's so therapeutic.
And playing music, and you know, if we'd gone through, if you had some educational psychologists go through and look at the kids in first year at music college, I'm telling you, about 90% of us we're all just stimming away in orchestra, having, you know, communicating without words and having a great time.
Yeah, I think most creative arts people would be neurodivergent, and they would know it themselves now. The way more people are being diagnosed, for sure. Darn it, I see we've only 10 minutes left, and I don't want to make this too long, and I don't want to edit any of this out, because I think we've covered amazing stuff. But I have some questions I'm going to ask all the guests. So is it okay to ask you? They're just fun, kind of light-hearted questions, but you can go into them deep if you want. So firstly, have you got a word of the year? Like, do you kind of set an intention and pick a word to inspire you or to lead you for the year? And I'll tell you my one. My one for this year is easy, because last year for me was really busy and I burnt out after a really busy year, and I wanted everything to feel easy this year. So that's kind of, if it's not easy, I'm not going to do it. That's my thing for this year.
That's a great word. I wish I had that word. I don't.
You may have my word. You may borrow it.
I think it would have to be integrity for me, because in the people that I meet, I'm looking for integrity, and I'm hoping to act with integrity in my own life. So to do a really good job, to be pleasant, but also to act with integrity and not let myself down or other people down by accepting poor treatment as well. So it's about fairness, and I suppose that's the neurodivergent person in me. But it's important to me that things are done with integrity. So
gorgeous. And then you can stand over everything that you've done and say, that was where my heart was at the time. You don't have any regrets, really. That's fantastic.
And I'm not lying. I don't ever you know, I'm not going to acquiesce, but I'm going to be kind and be straight, and that's how I am as a teacher. And I'm kind and I'm straight, and I think children benefit from boundaries, that knowing that you're fair but firm, and they do well and fun, hopefully, as well. But
I love that. Okay, is there a book or movie that made a big impression on you? And I'm talking in your formative years. Anything that's kind of stayed with you for any reason?
And when I was younger,
yeah.
A book or movie. This is going to sound terrible. Probably not. Not one thing that I can that leaps out at me. I was always just playing my clarinet. I mean, that was School of Music, clarinet. I was totally single-minded. But there is a film that I saw a number of years ago that stayed with me, and if you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's called The Weeping Camel.
Haven't even
It's
heard.
Mongolian. It's a movie. It's a sort of a docu-film, slightly set up, but following a narrative that was genuine, and the stuff in this film would be incredibly difficult to fake when you watch it. And if you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's about the power of music to help animals, really, and the power of a sort of a native cultural sort of view of what healing looks like. And The Weeping Camel is an amazing film. I'll give you a sort of quick background. It's about a camel who doesn't bond with her baby, and about how the community who are caring for these animals fix that problem. And they don't fix it. They have an intuitive sense of what the camel needs, and then they fix it. They call, and I won't tell you who they call, but they call someone to help with the job. And it's the most beautiful film, very quiet, very gentle, deeply moving, absolutely beautiful film if you get a chance to see it.
Sounds stunning. I will check it out. And I know it'll have me in tears probably from the
It
very
will.
titles. Oh my God. Do you have a motto for life, like a guiding principle that kind of carries you through the tough times?
Through the tough times.
Or maybe, yeah, through the good times or the bad times.
I think my guiding principle is that this too will pass. Bad times pass, good times pass, people pass, we pass. And I get a lot of comfort out of my insignificance in the grand scheme of things. I have, a great deal of faith in Mother Nature, and so it's just one of my little phrases that I say to students and to my kids is wait for the next wave. There are times in life where you sit around, you don't know what you're doing, you've got no motivation, you're having a day where you're meant to do stuff and you can't bring yourself to start any of it. And that's because you need to stop. Your brain's not working. It's working behind the scenes though. The subconscious is working very hard. You're just not able to work with your neocortex on that day. So sit there like you're a surfer out at sea, sit in your surfboard and look around and wait for that wave. And when it comes, be ready and get on it and surf for as long as you can, because that's the way.
Cool. I was actually going to ask you, separate to these questions, I was going to ask you, how do you handle those days? Because I know we all get them. And especially it can be really hard in the creative field when you have those days where you're uninspired, you're unmotivated, but everything's resting on you to get things done and to get things moving. You can't just phone it in because you're not in that kind of a job. So I was going to say to you, how do you handle that? And obviously your answer is to pause and know that
sometimes you've got to show up even when you don't feel like it. I've got to go to work and put a smile on and be all fun.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because I give myself grace to experience the resistance and to know that when the light goes on, I now know that it'll be okay, and I'll come back and I'll pay for it. I'll go to bed early, and there will be a cost, but I just have to balance the cost and trust the process, and I'm getting better at that. And I think maybe that's a neurodivergent thing as well. My daughter also, I see her get up to high dose. She's a real perfectionist like me. She'll do a really, really good job, but she'll torture herself, and she needs to be kinder to herself. So we just have to sort of try and be a little bit gentler, a bit more easy, like your motto. Just approach things with a bit more ease if possible, on those days where you have to show up.
Yeah,
just easy.
I am that perfectionist as well, and I was always a procrastinator because I thought if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to try at all. Whereas now I know better done than perfect, and that one carries me through a lot of the time.
My twin sister has a motto: the perfect is the enemy of the good. And my grandmother had a jug that now my sister has, and it was a little brown jug, and on the side of it it says, if you can't be easy, be as easy as you can. AISEY. If you can't be easy, be as easy as you can. That's it. That's the Ulster Scots, I think. But I think that's a good approach.
They're brilliant. Okay, I have one last question. What's your idea of perfect happiness?
My idea of perfect happiness is to be in the sun with my family, somewhere gorgeous, hopefully somewhere with lots of old stones, maybe with a few natural. I mean, I remember a day up in Slieve Martin above Ross Trevor when it was Lunasa and all the blaeberries were out, and we just sat amongst these blaeberries in the sun, shoving them into our faces in all different bits. We were all scattered throughout the hillside just eating these sweet berries, and it felt like just perfection that day. A walk and the delicious free food and the people that I love. That was perfection for me.
That's beautiful. You've painted a gorgeous picture. I think that's a beautiful place to end, Anne. Unless there's any projects you want to tell us about.
Oh gosh, well, there is a project coming up that I really hope people could come and see. Yeah, so this project, this storytelling project for the Armstrong Storytelling Trust, it's with two amazing women and myself, a trio. I'm sure there's nothing to that. You've a trio of women, and one of them is Vicky McFarlane, who's a storyteller and a writer, and Liz Weir, who's just a legend, and she's a fabulous storyteller and sort of the mother of all storytellers here. And so we're doing a project that's looking at women's stories from mythology, from history, folklore, and from sort of right up till the 20th century. And we're sort of weaving those together. And we brought our pieces of work, our independent pieces of work, to the table to share just last week. So my compositions, and I've written a story that I'm really proud of, and they brought their stories, and we tried to see how they would all fit together. And they fit together. I mean, it's going to be a fabulous, I'm not just saying this because I'm in it, but I genuinely think it's going to be a really special thing. And so we are premiering our piece of work at the Glen Storytelling Festival in Antrim, and that's on the 20th of October. But then after that, we're coming down near our neck of the woods, down to Dunleary, to be at the Fido Festival. And that's on the 22nd, so Tuesday the 22nd, just looking at my diary. And that, so I'm really, really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be very powerful, and I'm really proud of the piece. And I love collaborating. You know, that's so exciting when you bring different people's creative forces together. It's just so powerful.
The energies together. There's so much power when women to come together. I'm definitely going to go to that and maybe bring a couple of friends as well, because I know offhand a few people who would love it, who it would be right up their street. Can you give us a flavor of what the stories include? Are they kind of life, birth to death, kind of women going through big life events?
All of that stuff. So it covers some of the stuff that we've talked about today. So my story is coming from the perspective of the Cailleach Beara, the land and the violation, and the story, her story. And then some of the other stories are mythological stories of aspects of this feminine, spiritual goddess, whatever, but sort of different stories about her and how she moves in the world, the angry, the vulnerable, the mother. And then some of the stories are from personal sort of perspectives, issues around birth, and particularly issues around that Ireland has struggled with around birth and motherhood and the church. And you can imagine for yourself that there's a lot of stories that we need to sort of try and bring forward here as well. So there's a lot of things that we're talking about, and we're also looking at the role of women that maybe we don't play so much. So the hands that bring the babies into the world, and maybe that take them out of the world as well. So that the lullabies and the keens are things that I was researching, so that it would inform my compositions, so that we can really kind of bring together as many of the strands that have been lost. And the caning tradition, I know you're interested in the caning tradition, and it's a sort of the songs that were sung around death and grief. And in Ireland there has been a long-standing tradition of caning, which has almost died out, and the songs are not necessarily songs in the sense that you might know a song. They're more of a vocal expression of grief, which would have enabled people to experience and to sort of unburden themselves with their own grief. And in music in Ireland, historically, we had sort of three important strains of music. They're known as the three noble strains, and I'm really passionate about these three strains of music because I use them in healthcare settings. And the Galtree, the Gantry, and the Suantry.
I remember.
You do?
Music, yeah.
Good. Because I was never taught about these.
Weren't the Suantry the lullabies? Am I right? And the gull was to do with crying. So are they the laments?
Yeah, grief strain. Yeah.
Three must be the happy ones then, are they?
That's right.
Yeah.
So and as kind of musical prescriptions, we've got these three kind of well-established strains of music: one to lift us up and make us feel happy, one to help us unburden ourselves, one to help us relax and sleep, And I think that in life, those are the three prescriptions that we most often need to go to. We're either looking for a weepy film or some music to get us going, or something to help us to sleep. And I know that from, you know, playing the harp for people in hospital, I've seen the numbers change on the machines when they hear gentle music, and it's just amazing. Like, it is amazing. I sometimes wish there was more doctors around to see it, because it's powerful medicine.
It really,
So
that's fantastic. What a privilege you're there at that time when people need you and you're able to provide that.
well, I was able to. I was a artist in residence for the healthcare trust here, but sadly all the funding got cut because, you know, it's just optional these days to have.
So would you
It's
recommend, say if someone has trouble sleeping, sorry, I jumped over you there. Would
okay.
like, you know, these headspace apps and calm apps, do you recommend people go for spoken word, as in someone narrating a story, or maybe sounds from nature, or maybe just pure music with no lyrics? What would be the most effective, do you think?
That, I think that would depend on the person and the situation. For me, I actually listen to really crappy podcasts, not podcasts like this one. I listen to like Sasquatch Chronicles, which is class. It's hilarious.
That's great, actually.
Do you
Yeah.
listen to that?
No,
Awesome.
no, I don't listen to it, but I've heard it's amazing. Somebody was
It's
just saying
it's a
fascinating.
and you know, it's really interesting. I believe anyway, we could talk all day about Sasquatch, but I listen to just drivel when I go to sleep,
Yeah.
and that's fine. Some people used to listen to the shipping forecast, you know, because it was nice and calming.
Yeah, shipping.
But in terms of music, I would definitely say, you know, if you're wanting to go to sleep, you don't put something on that goes doof 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 doof. That's going to raise your heart rate. So we've got what we know from watching audiences who come to classical music concerts and performers as well, is that we actually align our rhythms, our internal rhythms, our heart rates will become in alignment. It's called entrainment. So in a concert, we're experiencing the same emotions playing, and as the audience is feeling, we're feeling the same feelings, and our physiology is mirroring each other's physiology. And so what we're looking for then, if we're trying to go to sleep, is something that's going to reduce maybe our heart rate and our anxiety levels and our cortisol levels. So a healthy resting heart rate, what's that, between 60 and 80?
Yeah.
So we want the pulse of the music to be that sort of speed and not faster. So that's the best advice I can give you. But as I say, I listen to drivel.
For me, it's like fashion YouTubers like Trini talking about capsule wardrobes, and I can just go to sleep listening to that.
That's yes, I would argue there's some truth in Trini, but there's a lot of drivel too.
Yeah, of course.
Bless her. She's so driven.
I met her a few weeks ago. I was very starstruck. I just love her. I love her, like, focus, her business orientated, just go get it kind of attitude. And I do think there's so much power in how we dress and how we feel, and then how we behave on the day. I certainly feel the days I slob around in my pajamas or in, you know, my oldest, grossest clothes, I'm not as productive and I'm not as happy. So the days like today, I get up and do my hair, I put on something nice, I feel like I can tackle whatever comes.
Yes, because it's not makeup, it's armor. And I think there is truth in that.
Yeah.
And it becomes more important the older I get as well. You know, I feel like I have to just put a bit of slap on now.
Oh, you don't need it. You're gorgeous.
I never used to wear makeup. Now I do wear a bit of makeup.
Yeah. I just love it. As my previous podcast guest, Fiona, she's an author from New Zealand, we were discussing, is makeup armor, and she said it's just like an enhancement, like brushing her teeth or brushing her hair. She doesn't need it, but it just helps her feel that she is presenting her best self. And I can go out without makeup, but when I catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror, I like to have a little something on, at least a bit of color in my lips. And
I think for me, it's hard because when I perform, and certainly during the lockdown, oh my God, I had to do videos all the time.
You did amazing videos of your music during lockdown.
I hated looking at myself, you know, hated.
Oh,
And then you're criticizing everything about yourself. So if I can't see myself, I'm fine. But unfortunately these days other people have cameras and they have videos, and so you get to see yourself and you go, oh God.
and do not waste 1 second worrying about how you look. That's something I've learned as I've got older. I am so blessed to be here in this body. And you know yourself, you'll look back in 10 years and wish that you had the health and the looks that you have now. So Don't waste a second of your precious energy on
No,
that.
I do it all despite those insecurities, but I think we have to be honest and say, like, people do, people worry about that stuff because that's society, and it's not new either. I mean, it's not social media necessarily that's changed that. It's just the way humans are. But women are the worst. Men don't care.
Men don't care. They're just delighted to have us around. I think it's women are judging other women. That's where it's coming
Yeah,
from. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
But we do that less. I think we are kinder when we get older. I think young women take a lot of it for granted, and they have maybe more time to fret about their eyelashes and their nails. And
Great.
then, we don't have that time, do we? Listen, I don't seem to have that time.
To fret about these, I just don't.
I can't have long nails. It's a thing for me. I can't play with long nails. So as soon as they get any white on, it's coming off again.
I just can't grow
And
my full stop. They just never grow. They're very brittle and weak, whatever. It's probably a nutritional deficiency I need to look into or
oh,
something.
stop. I know, you sort of run out. It's like painting the fourth bridge. You
Yeah,
only have enough time to worry
I
about one thing at a time.
short. Yeah, I don't care.
You're
Um,
doing your best.
Listen, it's been amazing talking to you, and we could go on all day, but we won't. But I would love to check back in with you maybe in 6 months' time, and we will definitely put the links to your October dates in underneath for people who are interested either in Dunleary or where was the second place?
The first one is happening in the Glen Storytelling Festival in Antrim. I think it's the 20th of October, and then a couple of days later we're down in Dunleary.
So where can people find you, Anne, if they want to read more about your projects or your music or your storytelling?
So yes, my entire eclectic kind of output is on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Anne Harper Music and Stories. And then I have a website, which is anneharper.co.uk, where you can find out about various different parts of my life. I'll be playing down in Dublin at Clarinet Fest, which is an international clarinet festival that's happening at the end of July. And what else? I've got lots of different storytelling events.
You're Instagramming every day this year.
I'm trying to. I've been a bit rubbish since my phone died, so it's dropped down a wee bit. But I'm trying to do a post every day, kind of like as a diary.
It's lovely.
And I think Instagram's a kinder place than many of the other social medias.
Yeah, I love Instagram, I have to say. But so what's your Instagram handle for people looking for
Gosh, let me see.
We'll link it below.
It's more of a sort of personal one. It's my sort of public page is the Facebook page, and I have a Twitter account as well, which I do use. You can probably find me there if you just type in Anne Harper,
Lovely.
Gobby,
We will link all these in the show notes below. We're going to have to wrap it up there. I'm so sorry.
Thank you so much.
All day. I could talk to you all day about all your... I loved talking to Anne. I find her drive and her various projects really inspiring. Check out the links below to follow her work, and maybe I'll see some of you at her show in October. In episode 3, I speak to Anne a Day of Wild Simplicity about decluttering not just your home, but your mind too. Help me spread the joy by sharing this podcast with your friends. Give me a 5-star rating if I deserve it, and I'd love your feedback at the Wellness Clinic on socials or my website. If you got this far, you might want to sign up for my Inner Circle email at the link below. Thanks.